Alright, you guys, this episode of Paradigm Profiles is going to be something a little different. People have been asking me about the status of my second book, how far along I am, how much longer until I'm done, and when it's ultimately going to be released. Trust me, I've been working on it diligently. I've invested a lot of time into it, but you got to understand, writing a book requires a massive amount of time, and that it's just not as easy as sitting down and writing it. My intention was to have it done already. Honestly, I was aiming for November of last year, but as you can see, that didn't happen. If I was to invest all my time into writing a book, and I didn't spend or invest as much time as I do creating content for YouTube, then there's a good chance, that I might have been done already. But again, that didn't happen either. The last time I addressed this on one of my lives, I told you guys that even if I was to have it finished by tomorrow, it would still be at least another 5 or 6 months before it came out, as it still needs to be published and get worked out through an independent publisher. At any rate, I appreciate all the interest you guys have shown towards it, and I'm humbled by the fact that it's gotten so much attention. That's real. With that said, I told you guys that I was open to reading at least the foreword and 1 or 2 chapters, so that's what I'm gonna do. Will I end up reading the rest? We'll see. Anyways, what I'm about to read right now is the foreword. Keep in mind, it's the raw, uncut version. I haven't even edited myself, so this probably will change a little from the final version once I clean it all up and edit it. I'm not sure what chapter I'm gonna read yet after I do the foreword, but I'll make sure it's one of my better chapters. Without further ado, let me get into it. For those of you who read my first book, I'm sure you have a lot of lingering questions. What happened after I was released from the county jail? How much time some of the original defendants were given after standing trial? The current standings that some of these guys ended up in? Who held steadfast? Who continued to be part of this so-called righteous organization? And above all else, what direction and what path I have taken almost 10 years later since some of the smoke has settled. I struggle with the idea of writing a second book for many reasons. Not only because it's consumptively a massive undertaking that requires a great deal of time, but more so because I honestly intended on closing that chapter of my life the day I walked out of the county jail, and I never intended on looking back. But a lot of people who read my first book, who really took an interest in it, continue to urge me to write a sequel and to continue the story by telling them about the aftermath. I won't go into too many details about my motivation, where I encountered some of these people, and how they addressed me personally, because I'd be giving away some of the details in this book. But I will say this: one of the primary motivators that pushed me to write this second book was that I came to find out that my first book touched a lot of people, and that it was actually being used to help at-risk youth and other former gang members break away from that lifestyle. That alone was a major accomplishment for me, and it just confirmed that all my labors amounted to something, and that it wasn't all for nothing. For the purpose of writing this sequel, and also for the purpose of sharing some of the backstories that weren't included in my first book, I have to back up and start this book from the time when I was still in custody and prior to my sentencing. I won't repeat some of the things that I've already written about, as that's not necessary. But I'm only backing up until the time when I was still in custody so that I can go into detail and elaborate on some of the things that I didn't cover. I'm only telling you this so that some of you don't get thrown off and wonder why I didn't pick up directly after my last chapter, A New Beginning. As I said in my first book, I know I'm still going to have my critics. There's no avoiding this, as people are going to have their opinions no matter what. But I was actually surprised that my first book drew such a small amount of negative feedback, even from those who are still active in that lifestyle. Some of the reviews that were posted on Amazon were from self-proclaimed active gang members that knew me, and although they chose to remain anonymous, they gave it props. I definitely thought that they would have used that platform to take shots and to leave negative feedback, but to my surprise, it just didn't happen like that. People actually opened their minds and seen things for what they really were. Not poison coming from a soured former gang member, or not a bunch of slander from someone who was butthurt because of all the betrayal, but instead what they concluded themselves and what they got from me putting them in the moment. Don't get me wrong, I still have the usual criticism like, that book is full of lies and poison, or it's a book full of slander written by a rat. But I pay little attention to this, and honestly, I don't even take it serious. I mean, when you consider where it's coming from and who it is that's saying it, I just don't give it much thought. We're talking about some people who are literally sleepwalking, people who refuse to take their blinders off because of their false sense of loyalty to an organization that hasn't shown them its fury yet. This happens when they eventually get the short end of the stick and they find themselves in some type of precarious situation where they themselves are the subject of an internal investigation or something like that. I'm not trying to assassinate anyone's character, but again, some of these guys are uneducated, self-proclaimed, high-powered wannabe gang members that don't know basic arithmetic and who probably can't even pronounce half the words I use in this book. No, that's a misstatement. I know for a fact that they couldn't pronounce some of the words in my first book because I specifically remember a comment one of my critics posted where he criticized me for using words that were too sophisticated or too gaudy for the average, everyday person to comprehend. Without getting too critical, I responded by saying that the words I use are in fact common everyday words and that maybe the problem might lie somewhere with people who are lacking the common grammar school education necessary in order to read a book like that. But the funny part about all this is that 90% of these self-proclaimed solid, down for the cause toy soldiers will inevitably one day be on this side of the fence and will one day embrace the term dropout. That's just the reality of it. Look, I'm not special. It happened to me and I've seen it happen to a lot of other good homeboys over the years. For those of you who think it won't, can't, or that it'll never happen to you, you're not being honest with yourselves. I hope it doesn't, and maybe it won't. But if it doesn't, it's usually because you're not functioning at the type of level that I functioned at or on. It's kind of hard to get caught up or get put in those sticky situations when you're not part of the leadership or you're not part of the upper echelon. When you're involved in the politics on that level, you just become more prone to getting caught up or becoming a target by those who are constantly jockeying for position. Your status has a lot to do with it too. Because the more status you have, the higher standards you're held to. If you're always flying under the radar and you're not part of the leadership that pushes the organization forward, then it's kind of hard to get caught up or find yourself in a jam unless it's behind you violating some type of cowardice act or some type of misconduct that you had complete control over. To each his own, but like I said, if you were just a mudsucker, a bottom feeder, or one of them dudes who ducked and dodged your way through prison, then it's understandable why you never got caught up. It's when you start taking higher positions within the organization or being a part of the leadership that it starts to become harder to remain in good standings. Because nowadays, politics are played in such an underhanded fashion, or the organization expects so much out of you that it's nearly impossible to live up to these standards. Another irony of writing this second book is that I actually get the satisfaction of confirming some of the things I knew would happen. More specifically, referring to the circumstances surrounding that dirtbag Lencho. If you read my first book, then you obviously know why I can't stand the sight of that dude. And you also understand the reasons why I have no respect for him. But there is some comedy in this. As much as I can't stand the dude, I can't help but to have a sliver of compassion for him. To say he got reamed with a double-headed dildo to the hilt is a clear understatement. This idiot lost trial, his wife testified against him, and then she ended up getting together with one of his best friends. Then she left the state and got into the Federal Witness Protection Program and took everything he owned with her except for a pair of socks, and those were dirty. So his ex-wife and his best friend are now riding his Harley somewhere, and his best friend's probably wearing all his clothes. In some ways I want to laugh, but as much as I despise the dude, I'd be lying if I didn't say a minuscule part of me actually feels some sympathy for him. To make matters worse, he then got beat up in the county jail by the correctional officers and finally the whopper of them all. When this idiot was convicted and sent off to prison, he thought he was going to be famous. He thought he wasn't going to want for nothing and that he was going to be set once he got to San Quentin. Because he had the clavo, Spanish for drugs, keistered up his ass. But his luck continued going south, literally. Because during an unclothed body search, the initial one they perform when you arrive at the prison, the correctional officer searching him noticed a small white string protruding from his rectum. I have to admit, that's a deplorable and disgusting visual that just popped into my head as I'm telling you that. Similar to what it would look like if you were looking at a female and she had a Kotex string hanging from her vagina. Once this was discovered, they obviously did a much more thorough search and located a softball-sized bag of methamphetamine, 2 lighters, 4 pouches of tobacco, a bundle of marijuana, some PCP, a pinch of parsley, and some other miscellaneous items of contraband. I don't want to get too graphic, but one has to wonder how anyone normal that hasn't been tampered with could manage to secrete that much contraband in his rectum. I remember hearing about this when it first happened, and I just couldn't help but to wonder how fucked up this must have felt. I mean, come on, you just finished getting off the Grey Goose, prison slang for the bus, which is always a dreadful ride. You're still coming to grips with the fact that you're bringing a 45-year sentence with you, and that you might not never see the streets again. That in itself is a hard pill to swallow. But then you create somewhat of a bright spot and temporarily make everything better by bringing a fat ass glovel, only to get violated and have it yanked out of your ass. Any aspirations of coming up, being famous, and gaining all the luxuries that would have made your prison experience much more pleasant are now gone. Booyah, poof, gone, capiche. Talk about a morale breaker. But then again, I don't want to show too much compassion either, because that dude got everything he had coming to him, and that was just the beginning of his rough journey. I detailed the rest later in this book, but again, some of the main reasons that pushed and motivated me to follow through with writing this second book is not only because of the praise and positive feedback I got, but more importantly because of how I seen firsthand how it succeeded in touching a lot of people and how it benefited some of the at-risk youth I would eventually work with. You know, the one thing that still amazes me and continues to mystify me is how some of the people who were a part of that lifestyle I was involved in continue to foam at the mouth and say things like, I don't respect what he did. The people who cooperate are weak and were never about that life. Or people who sell their souls and cooperate with the police are trash. They knew what they signed up for but couldn't handle it. First of all, when I hear that kind of crap, I just shake my head and laugh about it because I know better. I'm living, walking, talking proof of someone who is a true believer in how things can change. How can anyone honestly refute that or say that I wasn't? I mean, let's keep it real. I lived my life in this criminal cesspool for over 30 years. You can't fake it or slip through the cracks if you were a charlatan for that long. You might attribute that to some of these youngsters that flip in and flip out 1 or 2 years later after they become involved in this lifestyle. But not to someone like me who did this for over 30 years and whose loyalty withstood the test of adversity time and time again. Whether it's because you get older and wiser, or your loyalties become stronger in other areas of your life, whether it's because you were betrayed and began to see things for what they were, or whether it's because you begin to look at life through a different lens. People change, and that's just the reality of it. Some people actually think that dudes like me who defected or who chose to grow up and change their thinking habits are weak and are cowards. I say to anyone who makes the mistake of thinking this, that this is a serious misestimation and that you might want to rethink this. Just because some of us have chosen to take different paths or who no longer apply ourselves to the belief system that you still glorify doesn't mean that we're weak or that we're cowards. That alter ego boxer will always be a part of who I am, and trust me, I might see things differently and I might not share your loyalties, but changing my thinking habits and my belief system never stopped me from spilling blood or doing dirt before. Some of you can continue to call yourselves diehard believers, and you can continue to chirp off about how you keep it 100 if it was you that had been in my situation. But unless you have, and unless you've overcome this type of adversity yourself in the past, you have zero credibility. It means nothing. You don't have to afford me any credit, and you can say that my claims are baseless and frivolous, but I consider myself to be one of the strongest believers of my era, and I can tell you honestly that I was one of the biggest advocates against everything that I've now become. Never in a million years would I ever have believed that I would have wrote a book, or let alone 2 books, and chose the path that I did. If you would have suggested this, I probably would have socked you in the mouth. But I did, and I changed. I still sometimes can't believe that it happened myself, but here I am, and I'm not just another run-of-the-mill dude. I don't say this to stroke my ego either, because I could honestly care less about all that shit now. But not too many C's or NF members functioned at the level that I did. I literally functioned right under the 3 generals, and I took my directives directly from them. Most NF members never make it past being a Category 2. In fact, the majority fall wayside as Category 1s. Again, I don't say this to inflate my own ego, but yet just to prove to some of you that I have the credibility to say and know what the hell I'm talking about. But before I get off topic and completely lose sight of what I'm trying to say, I just want to say this. The same people that drop negative comments on Amazon or YouTube, or who just make these feeble assertions about how solid they are the same people who would be the first ones to jump ship or get out of the way if they were ever in that position. It's easy to offer up an opinion or to be critical of someone else's hardships when it's not you that's looking at triple digits in prison, or when it isn't you that's faced with these types of dilemmas. But when the rabbit's got the gun and it's you that's in that situation, self-preservation has a way of creeping in, and it's just funny how fast your thinking changes. You can say I'm wrong all you want, and you can doubt everything I'm saying, but here's some more food for thought. I've been here, done that, so I can speak on it. What have you done that gives you some credibility? I know better, and I've seen it play out too many times. Listen, when I made my choices and I ultimately decided to defect from the Nuestra Familia, I remember listening to hundreds of phone calls, some from my co-defendants and some from other homeboys that were wrapped up in other cases. And I heard all the same bullshit. Damn, I can't believe B laid it down. Damn, fucking B went out ass backwards. Damn, B sold out, etc., etc. I heard it all. And it was coming from homeboys who I had at one point been real close with. But then something funny happened. Every last one of them who had been bumping their gums all got hit with indictments and were now in that same position I was once in. I already knew it was going to happen, and I just kicked back and relished as the entertainment played out before me. They started dropping like flies, literally. These are all the same guys who were busting at the seams with honor and integrity. Just like you guys out there who are talking about you have all this honor. One by one, they withered and fell out until there was no one left. Seriously, it got so bad that the district attorney, Lance Daughtry, and the officer that spearheaded these cases, Dan Livingston, threw up their hands and said, "Hold up. Every goddamn body can't cooperate. Somebody's got to go to prison." It was comical. Not only was the bus full, but you had motherfuckers hanging off the bumper, and there was no shortage of people waiting to catch the second and third bus. And most of these guys jumped ship because they didn't want to do the time, or because they wanted to get back out to the streets. That's not why I did it. I was at peace with spending the rest of my life in prison, and I always knew that that day would come. Those of you who read my first book know what happened in my situation, but it wasn't about the time or because my loyalty had wavered. I'm not saying I'm any better than anyone either, because I'm not. And at the end of the day, we all have our own reasons and we're all in the same boat. But I'd be lying if I didn't say that I got some much needed self-satisfaction from this. It almost felt like I was getting some justice back. So who's the weak one now? I never, not one time, tried justifying what I did or any of the choices I made. Never said it was okay, and always made it clear and stood firm about my position insofar as how I really felt about it. That it was bad business, that it was a greasy thing to do, and that it's something I'll never be okay with. If I was one of those dudes who tried justifying it, I point out the fact that I was never a precipient witness in any of these cases that I was used in. I'd point out that I didn't cooperate against any of my co-defendants. They all told on me or took deals. I'd also point out that the only thing I ever testified about was a generalization on how gangs operate, the inner workings, and that everything I talked about was recycled and had already been said. That the other individuals from San Jose who testified were the ones who drove the nails in the coffins, not me. It's all public information. Anyone willing to invest that much time can see that for themselves. But I never jumped on that bandwagon, and I never tried to insult people's intelligence like that. Because no matter how you cut it, just going through the motions of doing something like that, whether it was recycled or not, doesn't matter. I'm just saying, for all those of you who try to portray yourself as being some type of hardcore gangster, stop it, cut it out. You're not fooling nobody but yourself. None of you are any different from any of us who caught these cases. That's just the way the cookie crumbles. I've seen some of the hardest dudes lay down and cooperate for different reasons. A wife, a girlfriend, kids, because they just got tired of living a life that has no real purpose to it. Or because the blinders came off and they just seen that there's a bigger world out there that goes beyond the little dark corners that we so often keep ourselves confined to. Dudes you never would have expected to take that route. Wake up one day and just say, fuck it, this shit ain't for me anymore. I'm tired of being pushed and pulled, and I just want normalcy now. That's how it goes. But like I said, life has a way of changing even some of the most hardest and most solidest dudes in the game. So to all the naysayers, the super active hardcore gangsters that feel like they can't be broken, save all the high power bullshit, and for once in your life, keep it real. Keep it real, man, because sooner or later, you're going to be forced into a situation where you're going to have to really be honest with yourself. The only reason some of you remain in good standings or haven't found yourselves in the O's crosshairs is because you either never function on a higher level, you've never been exposed to the politics played by the upper echelon, or because you've been fortunate enough to have never been exposed to some of the real adversity that comes with this lifestyle. I'm not talking about facing 2 or 3 years. I'm not talking about losing a little bit of good time, nor am I talking about making a sacrifice. I'm talking about real adversity. And until your mettle has really been tested, and until you've walked in them shoes before, you can't even begin to pass judgment or criticize the next man behind his shortcomings. I used to say and think the same way. Fuck all them degenerates that drop out and turn their backs on us. That scum who gets weak and who goes crawling on their bellies licking the boots of these cops. I used to advocate hard against shit like that and despise DOs the same way I'm sure a lot of you do. But one day, mark my words, you're going to find yourself on the other side of the O's afflictions, or it's going to be your life that's going to be hanging in the balance, and then you're going to understand what it feels like to be on that end of it. Because it happens to all of us. It's not a matter of if it's going to happen, it's a matter of when it's going to happen. And when reality hits home, trust me, it hits hard. Like they say, it gets cold outside when you're all alone. Anyways, again, as I said in my first book, this book is not about embellishments. It's not about hyping myself up, and it's not my intention to glorify anything about this lifestyle. The one thing that's a little different about this book from my first book is that I recounted a lot more of the negative things I was involved in, only because some of the YouTube viewers overwhelmingly asked that I leave no stone unturned, that I give them complete transparency so that they can understand the lifestyle better and why I made some of the choices that I did. I chose to leave out a lot of the fights, the stabbings, and the shootings I was involved in my first book because I didn't want people to get the wrong idea about why I decided to write the book. I think when there's too many stories about all the acts of violence guys like me commit while we were a part of that lifestyle, it begins to feel like you're glorifying the violence or like you're embellishing some of the facts. In my first book, I gave the bare minimum of my dirt, not even a fraction of all the fights I've really been in or any of the dirt that I really did, and people still thought I was embellishing the facts. In fact, they actually started calling me the Terminator in good humor. But this was only after recounting about 3 fist fights, 3 stabbings, and a couple shootings. I could see if I was claiming dozens of bodies, stepping on people's necks, breaking jaws, splitting wigs, and smashing on dudes. But this wasn't the case. The first book was also written for different reasons too. I wrote it because I felt like a hypocrite in the eyes of all those that knew me over the years. All the people who I had educated and all those who I had instilled that belief system in myself. Whether or not the book succeeded in changing their perception of me didn't really matter, and I didn't really expect it to. But at the very least, I at least wanted them to understand and hear directly from me why I chose to make some of the choices that I did. The purpose of this second book was to help other guys like me that are going through similar transitions and who could possibly use it as a guide to help push them along with their own transition. This is just a continuation of the sempiternal path I traveled, where I'm at today and what life is like after dropping out of a cutthroat criminal organization like the Nuestra Familia. I hope this second book succeeds in touching as many lives as my first book, and I honestly hope that some of you who have also chosen to defect can use this book or some of the information I've shared in it as a template to help you with your own transitions back out into the real world like I did. I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode of Paradigm Profiles. As I said, this was a raw, uncut version of my second book's Foreward, so there's probably going to be some alterations to the final version. Chances are I'll probably be going live to talk about this with Sandman once it airs, so we'll decide then what the best chapter is to read next. A lot of it's going to depend on your feedback and what it is that might be piquing your interest. As always, thank you guys for your support and for just continuing to stick with us.